Hey, welcome to our weekly Cardinal podcast. Rob Rains, pleased to be joined here again by Mike Rains. Thanks for everybody else for joining in. Mike, how are you doing this morning?
Good. Glad to be back again.
I saw the forecast was highs in the 50s next week in St. Louis. That gets me a little bit more ready for Florida, although I was ready for Florida when it was 7 below, too.
I was asking the other day when you're leaving for spring training. I feel like it bumps up every year, so you don't have to be here longer.
Well, thanks to our good friends at the Homewood Suites, we can go down there about the middle of February, and we'll be there for the rest of the spring training. So, yeah, looking forward to that. Obviously, thanks to our sponsors, the Drury Hotels Company, as well as AAA Travel in Missouri, both big sponsors of ours, and appreciate their help in helping us get our little car on the road and headed down to Florida here pretty soon, a couple of weeks. Once you hit that last week of January, hit those conference championship games in football, we know it's getting close. So we'll be there. We'll be there soon and ready to go. So I do want to mention one thing right off the bat. Speaking of spring training, before we get into our real Cardinal talk for the week, is that I mentioned our headquarters hotel has now been that way for about 10 or 12 years. The Homewood Suites right there on Donald Ross Boulevard. It's a Hilton property, so it's a great hotel, shopping center right next to it. And if you haven't made your reservations yet for coming down to spring training, they still have some rooms available. Just talked to the people down there the other day this week, and they said they're at the end of February. And when I talked to somebody else last night, he's going right at the end of February, as well as then like after March 16th, they have rooms. They have a block of rooms that we have a discounted rate for. Call down there and ask for Elise Robinson. All the information is on our spring training tab, story on our spring training page here on the website, as well as being the new newsletter that's going out later on Thursday. So you can get the information there as well. They have a certain block of rooms that are available at a discounted rate, but middle part of March, when our party is March 7th, around those dates has already been sold out of those rooms. But early part of spring training, last part of spring training, if you're still looking for a chance to go down there, you can get a room at the Homewood Suites Hotel. So appreciate them. And even if you're not going to spring training, I hope you're looking forward to it, getting all of our coverage, getting the podcast, we'll be back with the Jupiter Minute again, recapping all the day's activities of spring training. So you kind of live through us, even if you're not able to be down there, because it's still, obviously, I think a lot of interest. And Mike, I think there'll be a lot of interest in the Cardinals this spring based on, you would think maybe based on last year and the poor season, there wouldn't be as much interest, but I think there is interest because of people want to see if we're going to bounce back from that.
Yeah, and I think you're excited to see like how some of these guys pick up and come back, right? Because it was a down year for Goldie and Arenado, so you want to see how they come back and how they look strong. And I think the other fun thing about spring training is watching some of these young guys, right? Because a lot of people haven't seen Thomas Sagasi and how strong of an impact he's going to make, or Victor Scott. There's a lot of different things you can watch during spring training, which makes it a lot of fun to go.
And even if you can't go down there, I know, and they have not announced the broadcast schedule yet for the games in Florida, but there's usually probably about 10, maybe somewhere in that range, games that are either available on the Valley Sports Midwest with Chip and Brad doing the games, or even on some of the other channels, Houston, Washington. They sometimes broadcast some games, so you can pick them up that way. So the Mets do a lot of games in spring training, so there's a good opportunity to watch some of the spring training games, even if you can't be down there in person.
And there's always Camo X too, so you can always listen along and see what's going on. A little different than watching the game, but still an option.
And baseball and radio is still great. Always has been, always will be. John Rooney on the call, you can't get any better than that. Speaking of the Cardinals and players to watch in spring training, we got another one that we didn't see coming. Last Friday, the Cardinals announced the signing of Matt Carpenter to a one-year contract. And I know initially when I looked at the press release, I had to do two things. Number one, I wanted to make sure it wasn't a fake account. And then number two, I wanted to make sure that it wasn't that he's coming back to sign a ceremonial, one-day contract and then retire as a Cardinal. But we found out it was very legitimate. And it was about a minute later that my phone rang, and it was you on the other end of the phone that you had seen the news too. I don't think anybody saw that coming.
I don't think anybody did. No. It's one of those that you wonder how much Mo is taking to heart of what Arenado and Goldie have said about needing a veteran presence and needing a stronger winning attitude in the locker room. And that certainly is someone in Matt Carpenter. You question how strong his bat's still going to be. But I think it's going to be an exciting time for him to be back for sure.
And we did talk to him after the signing was announced, did a Zoom call, and I asked him, he's been doing a lot of work with Matt Holliday, and it was in the story that we ran, but he said he's actually going back there again this week, and he said Holliday, has fixed his swing before, and he's as comfortable now with his swing, he said, as he's been in years at this time of the spring. So we will see. I mean, he's going to have some pressure on him to see what he can perform. Although I will say this, there's two thoughts about this. Number one is, he's obviously filling the spot of the 26th player on that roster. So it's the last spot on the roster. You look at who maybe he would be bumping off that spot if he wasn't here. And I don't know that there's anybody who really you would count on being a big contributor as a 26th player. If there's 13 position players, 13 pitchers, maybe somebody like Jose Fermin would have been on the roster. Maybe a younger guy would force his way onto that roster, but the role that person is going to fill, the opportunity is going to be kind of limited. So it might even be a situation where Matt Carpenter is going to be more of a help to this team with what he does in off the field, not even as a player, but just kind of talking to Walker and Wynn and Gorman and Donovan and some of those guys and helping them through some of their issues, almost as like a third hitting coach, if you will. And people are going to say, okay, well, if he's going to be a coach, why didn't you just hire him as a coach? Because I think he still feels like he has something that he wants to contribute as a player. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
And I think the other interesting thing about Matt Carpenter, if we remember watching him, a lot of times I would get frustrated screaming at the TV because he doesn't swing the bat enough and he draws a lot of walks. And if you look at last year's team, that was one of the problems is we just couldn't move the rotation and couldn't get to the next guy in the lineup and couldn't get guys on base. And so in a pinch hit situation, a walk is almost as good as a hit, right? And so maybe that's another reason that's beneficial for him to, because it seems to me like he's always taking 8-9 pitches every at bat, right?
Yeah. So even though it surprised me, and even though I didn't see it coming, when you sit back and take a little bit deeper look at it, it doesn't bother me. I mean, I don't know how he's going to play. That's the one thing. He's still going to have to perform. I mean, obviously, when he left here, he wasn't playing well. But again, like Mosaic pointed out in his comments, is that at that point, he still thought he was one to play all the time. I mean, he knows his situation has changed now. He knows his role is going to be different, and I think he's prepared for that. But when he went to the Yankees, he caught fire there and played great. And I know part of that was he could attribute that to the ballpark and the difference in how far the right field fence is than it is at Busch Stadium. But maybe they'll get lucky. I mean, maybe we'll be able to find a way to contribute.
I think the two things to look at too are, one is when he went to the Yankees and really did so well, he really credited Matt Holliday with working on his swing, and that's what got it better. So if he's been working hard with him this offseason, maybe that's another thing to look at. The other thing to consider too is the salary aspect of it, right? Because you're paying him the same amount you would be paying Jose Fermin. And who would you rather have here? At the end of the day, we'd probably rather have Matt Carpenter because the Braves are paying him $5.5 million to play for somebody else. So
So that's true. So we'll see. The other positive development I think that happened this week was Tommy Edman getting a 2-year contract, new contract for this year and carries into next year as well. And the main thing that does, it avoids the ugliness of the salary arbitration hearing. They had filed, $450,000 apart in what he was asking for and what the team was offering on his contract for this year. So you get that out of the way. You get a contract signed for next year that you don't have to worry about. And then that's when he hits free agency after next year. So I think that was a positive move to get that deal done too.
And I think having peace of mind helps too, right? Knowing you've got a deal, knowing you're locked in, knowing you're here, just calms the nerves and keeps people, relaxed and a little bit more, I guess the other question is when you look at contracts and salaries, have there's been any talk of Goldschmidt or their plans to extend him?
It seemed like that was something that they normally talk about in spring training, but it seemed like based on the comments that John Mosaic made at the winter warm-up and some of the other things we've seen, that both sides actually kind of want to wait and take a look at that. So I don't think that's going to be something that's going to happen in spring training. I think there's still a possibility of it happening later on during the season, but he had said they want to get off to see how the team gets off to, what kind of start the team gets off to, what kind of start Goldschmidt gets off to. So I think that's something that will be coming up, and there's talks will be coming up, but I'd be surprised if anything gets done before the season starts.
It seems like some players kind of let that bother them throughout the season or cause some friction, but Goldie's probably not one of those guys, right?
I wouldn't think so. He seems like he's able to separate playing from everything else. So I don't think not having a contract beyond this season is going to be a problem to him. No. So the other thing that happened since we last talked, Rob Rains here visiting with Mike Rains on our weekly Cardinal podcast, is the Hall of Fame voting results was announced. I don't think it was really any big surprise that 3 players who were elected, 2 in their first year of eligibility, in Adrian Beltre, Joe Mauer, and then Todd Helton finally gets in, I think his 6th year on the ballot. Billy Wagner 5 votes short, which you got to think maybe will put him in place to get in next year. You hope so anyway. And then at the other end of the scale, when we talked about this last time on the podcast, was Matt Holliday. And I know my thoughts on the situation. I explained it all in a column that I put up on the website on Monday. was that Holiday was not going to get enough votes to get in the Hall of Fame, but I wanted him to see if he could get enough votes to stay on the ballot and not just disappear after 1 year. But unfortunately, that didn't happen, as he only received 4 votes out of the almost 400 from the Baseball Writers Association of America. So that's only chance he had to be on the ballot will be this year. So I'm not disappointed by that. I didn't ever think he really was a Hall of Fame player, but I was hoping he would be more than a one and done player. That's why he got my vote, but other people didn't see it that way. So.
Yeah, I think when you talk about lose, I would have thought that he would have had more than 4 votes, right? There's a lot of people on this list that you look at and think like, I probably would have put Holiday above them. But yes, it is kind of a surprising thing. I think the other thing when you look at the Hall of Fame ballot is Gary Sheffield's kind of the one guy that's, looked at as he was close, but this is his 10th year. So does he stand a chance to get in with the committee, or is he probably one of those guys that's just going to be always close, but on the outside looking in?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, the committee has already turned down, some of the other guys who were associated with steroids in their playing career and didn't put them in. So you got to think he maybe has a little bit of uphill battle. It's one of those. The veterans committees are always interesting to do because they're made up of mostly former players who are in the Hall of Fame, as well as a few executives and a few baseball writers. The committees change every time. They're not the same people. They're kind of rotating in and out off that committee. So the makeup of the committee is always interesting. If he would get a couple of his former teammates, guys that he played with, in his career or contemporaries to his career that maybe would vote for him and speak highly of him, maybe he has a chance. You just never know. I almost think the politics of it on those veterans committee enters into it more than the politics do in the vote by the writers.
And I think that's where, like, when you look at the politics aspect of it, not coming up yet, but another Cardinal down the road is Adam Wainwright. And a lot of people have talked about him and whether or not he deserves it or not, right? Just barely getting to 200 wins, but not winning a Cy Young and, missing some 2 key years there. And so it's interesting to look at with the politics of who he is as a person and what he's done in the community, give him a little bit more than Matt Holliday's 4 votes, right? So, does somebody like that stand a chance? And not saying whether they should or shouldn't, but
right. And the other part of that too is who else is on the ballot. That is always, some years it's a really stacked ballot. Some years there's a lot of really deserving candidates. I mean, they're probably, the 3 guys who got in this year, there's probably at least 3 or 4 more who are going to get in the Hall of Fame here at some point in the next couple of years. So I mean, that's a pretty good ballot that you got. And then, so you'll get Pujols and Molina will be on the ballot in 2028. You got to think they're both going in the first time. Wainwright will come up in 2029. So just to see who else continues on, not just the guys who are eligible for the first year, the first ballot, but who else carried over candidates on that ballot that would impact the vote. So it's always interesting.
And it's interesting too that some people have like, hey, we don't want to put in more than 3 in a given year, or 4 than a given year, right? It seems like some of those guys, 3 seems like one of the larger classes. I don't know if they've had one bigger than that
yeah.
before, but
a little bit, yeah. So it is hard. I mean, you got to 75% of the vote, and that's not easy. I've been around a lot of baseball writers for a lot of years, and trying to get 75% of them to agree on something is probably pretty hard. So, a couple other things to get to that non-Cardinal related, but in a way it is Cardinal related because it involves the other signings. The reliever market seems to starting to open up a little bit with some of the free agents now coming off the board. Still the big 4, the big Boris 4 still out there that haven't signed: Montgomery, Snell, Bellinger, and Chapman. So we'll see if something's moving on them finally as we get closer to February 1st. The Brewers with a move, picking up Rhys Hoskins for a 2-year contract. Now, you thought that was a good move for them as we kind of scout out the Cardinal opposition for the competition for this year.
Yeah, I don't really know who was going to play first base for them this year, right? I mean, it was kind of they had a few options that could have tag teamed it, but they are in need of a veteran presence over there too, and somebody that can play well. And we all remember the Rhys Hoskins home run with the bat spike that he did in the postseason. Was that 2 years ago, I guess?
Mm-hmm.
He was out last year. Yeah. So somebody of that caliber who is postseason experience, has winning experience, is always a good player. And, if you're the Cardinals, you're always watching what the Brewers and the Cubs are doing, and the Reds, right? You got to be careful on what's out there.
I think we both still think the Cubs have a move in them at some point here before spring training starts too.
Yeah, you wonder, is Cody Bellinger going to go back there since he's, used to it? And I think the biggest question is, what is Scott Boras doing waiting for all of these, right? Is he kind of doing his players a disservice by waiting this long, or is that just how he operates to try to get more money?
It's not the first time it's happened, so you got to think it's kind of just the way that he goes about it. So Cardinals still a lot of talk that and Mosaic mentioned it at the winter warm up. He mentioned it again on the Zoom call and with the reporters that was talking about the Carpenter signing. That they're still surveying the market, still kind of figuring out what's out there. They would like, I think, to add another bullpen arm, but it has to be the right guy, has to be the right price. So we'll see. They still have 2 weeks, almost 3 weeks till pitchers and catchers report to Jupiter. So there is still time to do something.
Do we think a Phil Maton or Hector Neris type player is a little bit higher than the salary that we want? So it may be somebody that, we haven't heard of as much, coming in, or do we think there's any hope in that?
I think that they're maybe what they're waiting on is to see if those, obviously the price is too high at this point or they would have signed. Even not with the Cardinals, but with anybody. So I think maybe the Cardinals are hoping that because there's still so many of those guys out there that maybe some of them will start to get a little bit, nervous and either take a 1-year deal for a little less money and then try again next winter, or see if their price will come down a little bit. I think that's still a possibility. Yeah, I've heard Maton's name connected to the Cardinals more than Neris, but we'll see. I think I would not be shocked if they get somebody else to come in and be a candidate for the bullpen. Although you look at some of the moves that they've made already over the winter, they brought in a lot of guys, and I'm not saying how good or not good they are, but they're going to have a lot of candidates going into this spring as far as possibilities in that bullpen.
The other question is, Libator looked a lot better in the bullpen, I thought, than he did as a starter currently. And I also thought the same with Steven Matz. So do they look at some of those options of like, hey, is there a fifth starter out here, i.e. Zach Thompson, instead of Matz and moving Matz to the bullpen or something like that too? Is that an option in spring they may play around with?
Yeah, I think it's possible. I think they've told both Thompson and Libator to come to spring training prepared to start in spring training, prepare at least to work on the starter schedule and build their arms up. Now, then they could still certainly shift back to the bullpen, as we've seen in the past. Excuse me, it's a lot easier to go that way than it is, from a starting role to a bullpen role than the other way around. So because of the wear and tear on your arm. So, and that's also assuming that nobody gets hurt. I mean, that's the other factor in here that you always have to keep into consideration is that there's injuries that happen everywhere, especially to pitchers.
And as we look toward to opening day and with this rotation and with these new guys that are here, who do you think gets tabbed as the home opener as the starter at Busch?
I haven't done the math to see, how many starters you'll have to use on that road trip and how it's going to. I got to think Sonny Gray starts game 1 in Los Angeles. How it falls after that, I don't know. It kind of may just depend on how and I don't remember if they have a day off in that situation or not. So I think it's probably a little bit too early to tell. You got to think maybe Michaelis would have a shot at that simply because of being the longest tenured Cardinal starter.
Yeah, I just didn't know if they put any thought to it of like, hey, we want this guy to have it as a new guy, or we want Lance Lynn to come back and get the ovation, or what. I just was curious what their thought.
Yeah, I haven't. It's interesting. I haven't heard a conversation about that yet. I mean, I think it was different when it was Wainwright, and I think everybody wanted him to have that opening day assignment. But I think it's just going to depend on how they decide to line him up for those the first 6 games on the road trip, and that's whose turn it is next.
Yeah, because I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but obviously you're going into the season with Sonny Gray as your 1, but then you're 2, 3, 4 between.
I think Michaelis is 2. I think Michaelis is probably 2 as of now, based on how the spring goes. And then you could put Lynn, Gibson, Matz, somewhere in that. I don't know that the order necessarily matters at that point, other than matchups. Other than if you want one of them to pitch against the Dodgers, he's pitching the 3rd game of that series. Or if you want, say, one of them for San Diego.
Yeah, okay.
Ollie Marmol loves the questions about pitching rotations. It came up during the winter warm-up, and we were asking him, like, go ahead, tell us your rotation. So he loves those questions about how he's going to line everybody up. So obviously you watched our podcast. Hopefully you signed up for the YouTube channel. Don't be scared to sign up for it. It just simply helps with our subscribers to have the number of subscribers that we have, and to have the advertisers know that we're reaching out to those people through the YouTube channel. So they're not going to bug you and ask you to do more things and stuff like that. So don't be scared off by that. Same thing as with our newsletter. If you already get the newsletter, thank you for subscribing to that. And again, don't be intimidated. You're not going to get bombarded with extra emails or extra advertisements or something like that because of the newsletter. And the good thing about the newsletter, and you'll find out when the next one goes out, we're actually going to have some giveaways coming up, including in the current newsletter. There'll be a way to get 2 tickets to a spring training game on March the 7th down in Jupiter. If you're going to be down that way, that's actually the day of our party at the Homewood Suites Hotel as well. And then coming up in future newsletters, we're going to actually be giving away 2 tickets to the home opener on April 4th. So you can get all that information by signing up for the regular newsletter. So, you got anything else for you want to bring up this week there, Mike?
No, I think I'm excited for spring training. We're getting closer to, February 13th, the pitchers and catchers report. So before we know it, it'll be here. And I think everybody's excited to see what this team can do, right? What are we going to turn around? And, the Cardinals don't ever really go through a rebuilding phase. So we're always in a place where we can contend for the top. And I think that's exciting if you're a Cardinal fan.
I hope that everybody checks out all the rest of our coverage of the Cardinals here on stlsportspage.com. And obviously, as we get closer to spring training, there'll be more stories coming up. It's already got some things in the works about kind of getting ready and get us down to Florida. So thanks for the visit, Mike. We'll talk to you again next week.
Thanks. Let's do it.
That's Mike Rains here, and I'm Rob Rains, stlsportspage.com on our weekly Cardinal podcast. Thanks for tuning in.